Canadians. I've heard the Canadian officials say, look, these new tariffs from the Trump administration would violate the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that the president himself put into effect and negotiated in the first term.
Yeah, and that is kind of an interesting wrinkle to all of this because the USMCA did expire early.
Rewind. In his first term, Trump replaced NAFTA with the USMCA and called it the best trade deal ever made. In Canada, we call it...
The clock is ticking for the United States to reach an agreement with one of its largest trading partners. The Trump administration plans to impose a 50% tariff on $20 billion worth of Canadian goods by Wednesday, unless Canada concedes to a series of demands after there were no talks. More talks are expected today after no agreement was reached between the two allies last night.
But the White House said it plainly. These 50% tariffs apply regardless of whether a good qualifies under USMCA. No
50% tariff levied on those items that you just saw on that full screen ahead of you a few seconds ago: motor vehicles, alcohol, dairy products, hockey sticks, cement. And it's because of the U.S. allegations that Canada is not treating certain imports like, autos, dairies from the United States side very fairly. And again, this is being levied under what they call Section 338, which is a law that allows the U.S. to levy these tariffs if they find that a foreign country is
Section 338 had not been used in about 75 years. It lets a president override a trade agreement on a single finding alone. And here is what makes this historic.
It's kind of an interesting wrinkle to all of this because the USMCA did expire earlier this year. That actually allows the current provisions of the USMCA to take hold for a number of years, but it did open the doors for renegotiation. And you see in the fact that the U.S. is posturing with this 50% tariff against Canada, but not against Mexico, that the U.S. probably would prefer, at least under this Trump administration, to go with some sort of bilateral agreement with our neighbors to the north and then a separate bilateral agreement with our neighbors to the south, as opposed to one overarching North American agreement. Now, when it comes to the question of where we are with the negotiations with Canada, it seems like the Canadian press and the
and notice who this hits and who it does not.
For a refusal by some Canadian provinces to stock U.S. alcohol. The clock is ticking here.
Yeah, it is ticking here, rather. But as we've seen in previous episodes,
the proclamation itself says it does not apply to any other country. This is aimed at Canada.
Is certainly on the table, but as we've seen in previous episodes, the U.S. and President Trump seem to have a particular bone to pick with Canada.
Yeah, and the worry here, Brian, overall here is that tariffs will somehow...
Canada says it violates the USMCA. U.S. officials say a newer law overrides an older deal. Trade experts say the courts will likely have to decide. So is this even legal? This is where it gets messy.
Trading partner because of proximity, of course. There are neighbors to the north. And when you think about specifically automotive products, if this tariff does come to pass, this would override exemptions on previous rounds of tariffs and would impose that 50% tariff on what is a huge industry, that is the automotive industry between the U.S. and Canada. That could raise car prices for all of us.
It is so unusual that a bill in Congress would repeal Section 338 entirely, stripping this power. Now the other side, because the U.S. says it did not start this. Uncut. The White House says this is retaliation. Its three proclamations cite Canada's provincial bans on U.S. alcohol, a dairy quota rule it says disadvantages U.S. suppliers, and a 25% surtax that applies only to U.S.-made cars. It argues Canada discriminated first, and there is data behind it. U.S. car exports to Canada fell about 22%, while imports from Mexico, Japan, and others rose to fill the gap. So where does that leave Canada? For now, Canada has merely matched an earlier U.S. auto tariff, has not launched full retaliation, and says it is ready to talk. Premiers like Doug Ford want a tougher line. So here is the picture. Trump built the USMCA. Now a dormant law lets him tariff Canada around it. Only Canada. And the courts may have to sort it out. Canada calls it a broken promise. The US calls it payback. So where do you land? Is Trump breaking his own deal or enforcing it against a Canada he says discriminated first? Tell us below and subscribe for clear, fair coverage of the Canada-US story.